At the dawn of civilizations, when firelight flickered on temple walls and kings still sought counsel from oracles, humanity's relationship with plants was more than survival. It was reverence. Every leaf, every root, every seed was considered an emissary of the divine, a living bridge between worlds. Among these green messengers, cannabis stood out not as a casual indulgence or a cultural trend, but as a mysterious key, one that promised not only healing and vision, but also trial and confrontation. To touch it was to step toward a threshold, and every threshold conceals both light and shadow. And so the question arises, one most people dismiss with a smirk or reduce to science and law. What truly happens to the spirit when one smokes marijuana? Not the political answer, not the pop culture myth that paints it as rebellion, and not the oversimplified medical narrative. The real inquiry goes deeper, into the echo of sacred traditions, the whisper of mystics, the guarded warnings of texts written long before cannabis became a marketing slogan. To engage with this plant is to step into an ancient conversation that stretches from India's ashrams to the deserts of Arabia, from the Hermetic philosophers of Alexandria to the chants of Rastafarian gatherings under Caribbean skies. Cannabis has always been a paradox. Criminalized and worshipped, demonized and adored, stripped of sanctity and then rebranded as holy, it is both sacred and profane. But plants are mirrors. They reveal not their nature, but ours. A key in the wrong hands is just a piece of metal, yet in the hands of one who knows the lock, it becomes passage. And so it is with cannabis. It is not the plant that defines the journey, but the one who consumes it, the clarity of their intention, the steadiness of their heart, the purity of their preparation. Ancient India placed cannabis among the 5 sacred plants bestowed upon humanity, a divine gift linked directly with Shiva, the god of dissolution and rebirth, the master of illusion and its unraveling. Devotees, wandering ascetics wrapped in ash and silence, consumed it not in careless laughter but in ceremonies of fasting, isolation, and prayer. Their clay chillums did not carry them into a haze of distraction but into the death of the ego itself. They sought not escape, but the unraveling of all identity that shackles the spirit. The smoke was a bridge to nothingness, and in nothingness to the infinite. In Taoist tradition, the story unfolds differently yet resonates with the same theme. Cannabis was considered an enhancer of life force, a plant capable of amplifying qi, the subtle current that animates body and soul. But Taoist masters were no fools. They knew that an amplifier magnifies whatever is already there. If the vessel was pure, the plant refined its essence. If chaotic, the plant fed chaos until it spilled over. The alchemist Ge Hong wrote of formulas mixing cannabis with ginseng to induce lucid dreams and expand perception. But he warned that imbalance turns the medicine into poison. The plant does not discriminate, it reflects. Even in the Sufi paths of the Islamic world, cannabis, particularly in the form of hashish, slipped into the hands of seekers. For some dervishes, it became a ladder to fana, the annihilation of self in the ocean of the divine. They spoke of ecstatic visions, of the beloved revealing itself through veils of smoke. Yet not all Sufis agreed. The poet Rumi, in his fierce tenderness, asked why one should seek God through intoxication when God already dances sober within the heart. For him, reliance on the plant risked turning a bridge into a crutch, and so its use was bound with restraint, reverence, and readiness to abandon it when it no longer served. Other traditions whispered the same caution in their own tongues. In the Zohar of Jewish mysticism, one finds the principle that forcing entry into the gates of light without due preparation leads not to illumination but to ruin. In the Old Testament, some scholars claim that the mysterious Kane bosom of the holy anointing oil was none other than cannabis itself. Yet if so, it was reserved for ritual, for sanctified acts, never for casual indulgence. Sacredness stripped of ritual becomes parody, and parody never sustains the soul. Across Africa and the Americas, shamans and priests treated every power plant with gravity, knowing that each carries a spirit, a vibration, a specific purpose. To consume without recognizing its essence was likened to beating a sacred drum without calling the spirit it was meant to invoke. And even among Rastafarians, perhaps the modern tradition most strongly tied to cannabis, the herb is not smoked for amusement but for communion. During reasoning sessions where the community gathers in prayer, chant, and reflection, ganja is sacrament, the smoke rising like incense before the living presence of God. To them it is not an escape, but a vow, a reminder that the divine dwells among the humble and the oppressed, and here lies the thread that connects all traditions. Cannabis is potential, not promise. It can open or it can bind. It can reveal or it can deceive. It is not the plant that determines the outcome, but the one who enters into its presence. The Corpus Hermeticum warns that the spirit does not yield to those drunk on themselves, and that shortcuts often lead not forward but back into the same cycle, disguised in new colors. Perhaps then the real question is not whether cannabis is sacred, but whether the one who lights it has cultivated the sacred within themselves. Because plants that open doors also hold up mirrors, and mirrors rarely flatter. They reflect not the image we polish for the world, but the one we bury deep within, the fears, the traumas, the desires we'd rather forget. The plant dissolves masks, and while that dissolution can liberate, it can also terrify. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung called this hidden reservoir the shadow, the sum of everything the ego refuses to face. Cannabis in many cases does not create paranoia or anxiety. It reveals it. It pulls back the curtain, and what emerges is not alien but our own neglected fragments. For mystics and shamans, this has never been surprising. To them, altered states always thin the protective veil of the psyche, making one vulnerable not only to buried wounds but to external forces drawn to those fractures. This is why discipline and preparation were never optional in sacred use. They were armor. To enter such states without guidance is to walk barefoot into a field of thorns, mistaking the moonlight for a clear path. And so, the question that lingers is not whether cannabis holds power. It always has. The question is whether we are ready for the truths it places before us, truths that may not look like visions of angels, but like fragments of ourselves we've long denied. When the veil is lifted, what appears first is rarely paradise. It is usually the very thing we've avoided: unease, trembling, the hollow echo of loneliness, the anxiety that has been waiting in silence. Cannabis, like other entheogens, does not generate these specters. It only illuminates them. The bad trip is not a punishment from the plant, but the psyche attempting to cleanse itself. To the unprepared, this cleansing feels like chaos. To the seeker who dares to stay present, it is revelation. Carl Jung taught that true wholeness begins only when we are willing to turn and face the shadow. What you repress becomes the very thing that imprisons you, but what you confront begins to release its hold. So when people report paranoia or restlessness under cannabis, the plant has simply pointed them toward the unhealed corridors of the soul. Whether you flee or remain is not determined by the herb. It is determined by your courage. Occult traditions long understood this peril. Dion Fortune, in her writings on psychic self-defense, explained that altered states weaken the etheric field, thinning the boundaries that shield us from lower vibrations. When consciousness falters, entities drawn to confusion or fear may approach, feeding on what leaks through. To modern ears, this may sound superstitious, yet beneath the imagery lies a psychological truth. Vulnerability invites influence. What you harbor inside becomes the magnet for what comes from outside. In the Sutras of Patanjali, the yoga master warns that herbs can indeed grant glimpses of siddhis, paranormal powers, heightened perception, dreamlike clarity. But he insists these gifts are illusory unless tempered with discipline and ethics. Without that anchor, they inflate the spiritual ego, which is far more treacherous than the ordinary one. To feel enlightened is not to be enlightened. To see visions is not to embody truth. Osho once put it plainly, drugs can open doors, but only silence keeps them open. Walk through unprepared and you may emerge more lost than when you began. On the energetic plane, practitioners of Kundalini Yoga, Reiki, and ceremonial magic often report that cannabis amplifies sensitivity of the auric field. This can sharpen awareness, heighten intuition, even awaken dormant streams of energy. But light without grounding is a dangerous beacon. It attracts moths as well as predators, beauty as well as distortion. Without steadiness, the seeker becomes a lighthouse without a captain, scattering radiance without direction. The shamans of the Amazon speak in parables. Every plant that opens, tests. The test is not mystical fireworks, but moral clarity. What will you do with what you see? Will you deny it, intellectualize it, act upon it? Many chronic users fail this test. Their bodies relax, but their souls stagnate. Inspiration flows, but rarely takes form. The sense of spiritual depth grows, yet no transformation manifests. In Kabbalistic terms, these are klipoth, shells of unintegrated experience, residue from revelations never embodied. They accumulate like dust, creating the illusion of depth while concealing emptiness. Here lies perhaps the greatest danger, confusing intensity with growth. Not all expansion is elevation. A balloon swells too, but its destiny is to burst. Cannabis, when consumed without consciousness, often supports this swelling. It nurtures a peace that feels profound but dissolves when the smoke clears. It simulates creativity without birthing creation, spiritual insight without ethical action. It sells the sensation of arrival without the discipline of the journey. Some defend their use with the phrase, "If I feel peace, then it works." But peace borrowed from a substance is fragile. It is the stillness of a locked room, not the stillness of a mountain in a storm. True peace arises uninvited, even amid chaos, because it is rooted in the eternal center. If cannabis provides tranquility, ask yourself, is it teaching you to generate that peace within, or is it merely renting you a temporary reprieve? In truth, most encounters with the divine begin not with bliss but with discomfort, with tears, confusion, shame, anger. The soul resists being exposed. Yet if you remain, if you breathe through the storm, a shift occurs. Not a cinematic vision, not psychedelic fireworks, but the gentle birth of integration, acceptance of what is, space for what may come. In this sense, cannabis is like a pool of water. Gaze into it and you may glimpse the heavens. Leap in recklessly and all you see is mud. The journey is never only personal. We walk within an invisible network, and what touches one resonates through the whole. No spiritual practice is isolated, no power plant purely individual. The way we approach cannabis collectively and culturally shapes the way it responds to us. Today, the plant sits uneasily between identities: medicine, vice, commodity, icon of rebellion, sacrament. Yet long before legalization debates and Netflix portrayals, it was already woven into the sacred. Among Rastafarians, for instance, ganja is the healing of the nations, invoked straight from the Book of Revelation. For them, to smoke is to pray. The herb is a holy medium, a way to draw closer to Jah, the living presence of God. During reasoning sessions, the smoke rises as incense in a living cathedral made not of stone but of community. In the circle, silence and song, reflection and fire join into a sacred liturgy. The herb does not isolate, it unites, it does not distract, it focuses. On the African continent, among Bantu traditions, records describe ritual use in funerals, initiations, passages between one stage of life and another. Cannabis was not used to escape pain, but to endure it, to move through it, to invite ancestors into presence. In these contexts, intoxication was not a crime against the divine, but a vehicle toward it. What mattered was not the smoke itself, but the framework of meaning surrounding it. In pre-Columbian America, cannabis was absent, but other power plants held the same place. Peyote, ayahuasca, tobacco, each was approached with reverence, always within a cosmology, a myth, a circle. Without myth, the plant collapses into sensation. Without ritual, it becomes mere stimulation. And this is precisely what modernity has done. It stripped cannabis of its temple and placed it on the shelf of consumerism. It turned a sacrament into a meme, a sacred key into a marketing logo, an instrument of prophecy into a product of fashion. The psychedelic wave of the 1960s attempted to resurrect some sense of ritual around cannabis. Yet what it conjured was often fragmented and rootless. Hippies gathered in fields, listening to Alan Watts, quoting Aldous Huxley, and mixing marijuana with LSD and protest chants. There was authentic yearning for transcendence, yes, but stripped of lineage, stripped of grounding. The plant became a banner of rebellion more than a vessel of integration. Huxley himself had warned in The Doors of Perception that visionary experience can reveal, but it cannot teach. It can open the window, but it cannot build the house. Without structure, the glimpse is fleeting, and fleeting glimpses can seduce the ego into believing it has already arrived. Western culture, in dismantling tradition, inadvertently created a void. Spirituality without ritual, ecstasy without integration, insight without transformation. Cannabis in this context was painted as a symbol of freedom, but rarely of responsibility. A plant that once invoked deities became a punchline in sitcoms and a commodity in head shops. What was once sacrament was reduced to a consumer product. Lighter, rolling paper, branded t-shirts, hashtags. The temple was replaced with marketing and the altar with entertainment. This is why in sacred traditions the use of cannabis is almost never solitary. The group provides the container, the compass, the witness. Rituals in Afro-Indigenous practices, for example, weave song, drum, rhythm, and smoke into a web of collective meaning. No one smokes in silence, disconnected. The community sustains the sacredness. Within that circle, the individual dissolves to be reborn in something greater. But in modern culture, the individual isolates. The darkened bedroom becomes the temple, the phone screen the scripture, and the smoke a lonely sacrament without anchor. And in that solitude, cannabis often magnifies disconnection rather than dissolving it. Every plant has a cultural soul, a symbolic cloak woven from all the stories humanity wraps around it. When cannabis was revered as a bridge to spirit, it acted as sacrament. When it is treated as a lifestyle accessory, it mirrors that trivialization. Like water, it takes the shape of the vessel it is poured into. Today's vessel is shallow, hurried, cynical, and profit-driven. And so the plant reflects back the same. The herb that once carried prayers now headlines Netflix comedies, celebrated not as a sacred teacher but as a convenient escape. Yet not all has been lost. There are still pockets of resistance, indigenous communities that refuse to let sacred plants be stripped of meaning by modern consumerism. Spiritual seekers who fast, pray, and sing before using cannabis, re-anchoring it in reverence. Urban mystics who, amidst the roar of cities, still light the herb as incense in a conscious prayer. The plant itself has not changed. What shifts is the context, the story, the intention. And maybe that is its most enduring lesson. The spiritual is not merely what happens inside us, but what we co-create as a collective. Spirituality is not measured by how high we feel in a moment of altered perception, but by the frequency we sustain in daily life. Not by what we glimpse in a haze of smoke, but by what we embody when the smoke clears. As an old African proverb reminds us, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Cannabis in sacred use was never about the individual. It was about the circle, the drum, the fire, the shared silence. True elevation is not solitary intoxication, but collective resonance. All power plants carry both possibility and peril. Cannabis can open a portal, but a portal is not a tourist attraction. It is a passage, and not every soul is ready for what lies on the other side. In Greek philosophy, discernment, krino, was the blade that separated truth from illusion. In Vedanta, the same principle is called viveka, the clear seeing that distinguishes the eternal from the ephemeral. Without discernment, the seeker mistakes hypersensitivity for enlightenment, visions for wisdom, sensations for transformation. What feels like profound clarity may be nothing more than intoxicated illusion. This is why so many mystics warned of the false light, that mental brilliance which dazzles but does not root. Cannabis can easily feed this illusion. It can provide sparkling insights, patterns, synchronicities, even mystical feelings. But if those insights do not alter the way you treat others, the way you navigate conflict, the way you embrace your own shadow, then they are nothing more than spiritual fireworks, beautiful in the night but vanishing without trace. True spirituality demands consistency. It asks not what you see with closed eyes, but what you do with open ones. It measures not how serene you feel in solitude, but how you embody compassion in the chaos of ordinary life. This is why cannabis, when consumed outside of structure, can foster a subtler addiction than chemical dependency. The addiction to feeling spiritual without living spiritually. To sit in smoke and believe oneself profound is easy. To carry that profundity into traffic jams, arguments, and grief is far harder. Enlightenment is not judged by visions, but by integration. Traditional occultists knew this danger well. They spoke of Hod, the Sephira on the Kabbalistic tree of life associated with intellect and illusion. Within Hod dwells what is called the false light, brilliant images and perceptions that mimic revelation but lack grounding. Cannabis, when misused, amplifies precisely this. Visions that dazzle but do not transform, clarity that intoxicates but does not heal. A circle of mirrors where the ego gazes at its own reflection, mistaking it for the face of God. This is why preparation is everything. The soil of the soul must be cleared before the seed of the plant can be planted. Without intention, without silence before and after, without humility and guidance, the plant's mirror can distort as much as it reveals. Sacredness is not in the smoke. It is in the space created around the smoke, in the prayer whispered before it touches the lips, in the silence honored after its release. The Sufi poet Hafiz once wrote, "God is a mirror that never mocks your reflection. It only shows it." Cannabis too functions as such a mirror. It does not laugh. It does not lie. It simply reflects. Whether that reflection liberates or traps depends entirely on whether the seeker is willing to see clearly and to act accordingly. Is cannabis a plant with spiritual potential? Absolutely, but potential is not destiny. Every sacred tool demands context, discipline, and responsibility. Stripped from ritual, torn from the hands of elders who guarded its mysteries, the plant becomes a hollow shell, a cultural product dressed in sacred colors but emptied of sacred meaning. True spiritual practice has never been about intoxication. It has always been about awakening, and awakening is not the same as escape. The seeker who reaches for cannabis without preparation risks mistaking sensation for transformation. It is easy to feel depth when your mind is flooded with impressions. Harder is to cultivate depth when faced with betrayal, loss, or conflict in the ordinary rhythms of life. Enlightenment is not revealed by flashes of color behind closed eyes, but by the way you step back into the world with your eyes open and your feet dusty from the road. This is where discernment becomes the compass. Without discernment, the path becomes a carousel, round and round in visions, synchronicities, insights that feel profound but evaporate with the smoke. One can spend years trapped in this loop, believing they are ascending when in truth they are circling. Cannabis, when unconsciously used, feeds precisely this illusion, the sensation of movement without direction, of expansion without elevation. And so, the ancients always paired the plant with ritual, fasting, chanting, silence, prayer, guidance from a master. These were not superstitions, they were hygiene for the soul. Just as one cleanses the body before entering a temple, the seeker was cleansed before engaging the plant. The preparation was as vital as the plant itself, for it tuned the instrument before amplification. Without tuning, the music becomes distortion, but modernity is impatient. We want the vision without the discipline, the insight without the labor, the ecstasy without the integration. Cannabis in this setting becomes the perfect accomplice. It provides glimpses, feelings, peace, but all on loan. The peace fades, the vision blurs, and so we return again and again, not to deepen but to repeat. This is the subtle trap, the addiction not to chemicals but to experiences that mimic growth while producing none. To appear wise under the influence is simple. Words flow, connections sparkle, revelations feel endless. But the real test comes afterward. Can you embody wisdom when the effect dissolves? Can you remain centered in a heated argument, compassionate when wronged, steady when uncertain? The divine does not measure us by the visions we see, but by the lives we live after seeing them. Cannabis in careless use can create what occultists call a fogged mirror, one where the ego sees itself as awakened, while in truth it has only curled into a comfortable dream. In traditional mysticism, this trap is sometimes described as the false dawn. The horizon glows, the seeker believes morning has arrived, but the sun has not yet risen. The light is real but not final, promising but not complete. Cannabis often generates such dawns. They feel like enlightenment, but they are only the early shimmer. Without continued discipline, without walking beyond the glow, the seeker mistakes the prelude for the symphony. For those who understand this, cannabis can still be a sacred ally. But its sacredness is not automatic, it must be earned. It is sacred when approached with humility, when its smoke is surrounded by silence, when prayer precedes it and integration follows. It is sacred when the seeker does not demand revelation but offers themselves as ready soil, willing to face not only visions but shadows. Sacredness is not in the plant, it is in the relationship. The Sufi master Hafiz once said, "The truth is a mirror in the hands of God." It fell and shattered. Everyone picked up a piece and thought they held the whole. Cannabis often presents such fragments. Each vision is true but partial. Each insight is real but incomplete. The mistake lies not in seeing the fragment but in believing it is the whole. This is where discernment slices illusion apart from reality, where humility reminds us that every glimpse is only a step. And so, perhaps the deeper question is not whether cannabis is sacred, but whether we are sacred enough to hold it. To take the plant without reverence is like drinking from a chalice without realizing it holds blood. It is to play with fire without knowing whether you are ready to be burned. The plant has always been a test, never a toy. For those who listen, it teaches something profound, that spirituality is not in altered states but in sustained states, not in the fireworks of vision but in the quiet persistence of compassion, humility, and presence. The plant may open a door, but only the seeker can choose whether to step through and walk forward. Many step through only to circle back into the same door over and over. A few, with patience and preparation, step through and never return the same. If cannabis lends you peace, do not stop at gratitude. Ask whether you can cultivate that peace without it. If it brings you vision, ask whether you can translate that vision into daily action. If it shows you your shadow, ask whether you have the courage to embrace it, to heal it, to integrate it. The plant offers mirrors. What you do with the reflection is the real measure of your path. Because in the end, the divine does not seek your visions. It seeks your transformation, not the fireworks in your mind, but the light in your being. Not the prayers whispered in smoke, but the compassion embodied in silence. Cannabis can aid this transformation, but it cannot guarantee it. The responsibility is yours and always has been. Cannabis, then, is neither villain nor savior. It does not carry inherent salvation or damnation. It is a mirror, a test, a threshold. In the hands of the careless, it becomes stagnation. Comfort disguised as depth, sedation mistaken for wisdom. In the hands of the reverent, it can become a teacher, though a teacher that rarely flatters. For it teaches by revealing, and what it reveals is not always light. Sometimes it shows the cracks we have spent lifetimes covering. This is why, in many traditions, cannabis was never taken lightly. The plant was not a toy for restless evenings or a background haze for laughter. It was a sacrament, or woven into rituals with fasting, song, fire, and silence. It was never isolated from myth, story, and community. The vessel that held it was as important as the plant itself, and when the vessel was shallow, the plant reflected shallowness. When the vessel was sacred, the plant revealed sacredness. Modern culture, for all its fascination with cannabis, often forgets this. We approach it casually, market it aggressively, joke about it endlessly. Yet beneath the laughter, something ancient stirs. The plant has not lost its power, only its context. And context can be rebuilt. For seekers willing to go beyond consumption into communion, beyond indulgence into intention, cannabis remains what it always was: a key. The question is not whether the key is real. It is whether we are prepared for the door it unlocks. The choice lies at a crossroads. Do we use cannabis to escape or to awaken? Do we let it soothe us into complacency or challenge us into transformation? Every puff carries this decision, though few recognize it. Most drift into the haze, mistaking stillness for growth, mistaking insight for embodiment. But a few awaken to the subtle demand hidden within the smoke. Will you act on what you see? Osho once remarked that anything can become a meditation if you are present, and anything can become a drug if you are absent. Presence is the fulcrum. Cannabis can be a meditation if surrounded by silence, reverence, and clarity of intention. But without presence, it becomes mere intoxication, no different from any other distraction that numbs the ache of existence. The plant does not dictate this outcome. You do. This is why elders always insisted on preparation. They knew that portals are not for sightseeing. They are passages. And not every soul is ready for what waits on the other side. Some will glimpse beauty, others horror, but all will see something real. And what is seen demands integration, or else it curdles into illusion. Without integration, visions become shells, empty echoes cluttering the soul. With integration, even the darkest revelation becomes seed for transformation. So ask yourself, when you light the herb, What are you seeking? Peace, silence, distance from pain? If these cannot be cultivated within, then the plant only lends you a temporary mirror. And mirrors show reflections, not realities. They show potential, not permanence. Do not mistake the glimpse for the journey. True spirituality is not about lights flashing behind your eyelids. It is about the light you sustain when the smoke clears. It is not about the calm you feel for an hour. It is about the peace you embody when chaos surrounds you. It is not about visions. It is about transformation. Cannabis can play a role in that transformation, but only if you are willing to do the work it reveals. The plant will not walk the path for you. It will only show you where the path begins, and perhaps this is the paradoxical gift of cannabis. It humbles us. It reminds us that sacredness is never in the tool, but in the user. The same plant can enslave or liberate, depending on the heart that approaches it. Like fire, it can warm or burn. Like water, it can nourish or drown. The plant offers possibility. What you choose is destiny. So when you next encounter cannabis, pause. Do not rush. Do not consume mindlessly. Ask whether you are ready, whether your intention is clear, whether your spirit is steady. If not, perhaps it is wiser to wait. For the plant is patient. It has existed long before us, and it will remain long after. It does not need us, but we may need it. And when we do, let us come with reverence, humility, and courage. For in the end, spirituality is not measured by what substances you use or what visions you see. It is measured by what you become, by the love you share, the compassion you embody, the truth you dare to live. Cannabis can aid this, but it can also hinder it. The difference lies not in the smoke, but in the soul who breathes it. And so I leave you with a final reflection. Every sacred plant asks a question, but only one. What will you do with what you see? The answer is not in the smoke, not in the vision, not even in the plant itself. The answer is in you. If these words stirred something within you, share them with another seeker. Not someone looking for escape, but someone longing for clarity, for truth, for depth. For spirituality has never been about traveling alone. It is about weaving circles, kindling fires, holding mirrors for one another. And perhaps, in the end, this is the greatest lesson cannabis has to offer. Not how to escape life, but how to walk more deeply within it. If this journey stirred something within you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with a fellow seeker. Subscribe to the Etheric Compass and continue exploring the hidden dimensions of spirit with us.